I'd like to raise the issue. There are a number of news stories out there about who created the Special Olympics, and the question arises because it's something so beautiful. There's no question, and you've already brought up Eunice Shriver, and you were present at the creation. How do you tell the story?
Well, I have to say that it's kind of a bifurcated creation. Let's face it, the Greeks created competition for sports. So what everybody has done since then, worldwide, has been participating in running and jumping, shot put, whatever it is, in their own country, in their own world, for athletic competition. And that's what I was trained to do, is to teach physical education. But I also was skilled in tap dancing, baton twirling, swimming, and other kinds of activities, art. So to work in the Chicago Park District, that was my field. It was a total recreation spectrum. You call it holistic, I guess, now. So when I started working with the children in 1965, I put on track meets, and we put on shows. We even put on Mary Poppins, where I taught the kids singing and dancing and twirling baton. You know, as rudimentary it was, but they learned music. They learned to move their feet if they could, or they moved their wheelchair to music. So it was that kind of activity. So when it was actually in August of 1967 that Dan Shannon, vice president of the Park District, and William McFetrich, who was president of the Chicago Park District, came out to West Pullman Park to see my program. Well, neither one of them had seen a retarded child at the time. Well, they were amazed that these kids were able to do what they could do. They knew they had the program, but they hadn't really seen it, had not met the children and met the parents and how proud the parents were. So they asked me that night, what can be done to get more people to bring their children out of the closet in Chicago to come to our parks to get this kind of a program? I said, I don't know. You know, I was, 22 or something like that? No, actually I was 23. And I said, I really don't know right now. And they said, would you be willing to come down to the administration building to think about this? Leave West Pullman Park. And I thought about it, and I called him and I said I would do that. And it was at that time, I remembered going to Little Grassy at Southern Illinois University and thinking that the only way to do this is to have something big at Soldier Field. I didn't know what it all was going to be, but I thought we needed a big event where we brought all the kids from the 10 park locations and to do track and field. So I called down there and I talked to Dr. William Freeberg, who is deceased now, 2011. But he was the man who was head of the Outdoor Education Recreation Department of Southern Illinois University. He was at the event that I was at in '65, but I never met him. But I figured, well, now I'm at downtown in the Park District, I should be able to pick up the phone and call. So I asked my supervisors if I could hire a consultant. So they said yes, and I called him, and he came up to Chicago, and together he played upon my idea of having a track meet. And he said, well, we should make it bigger. We should have an ice skating, Barbara and Scott King. We had a Teflon rink, we had a swimming pool. All those ideas came about to be an event at Soldier Field, a fun event. Not necessarily the goal was to be competition and the best winner, but it was to compete and enjoy yourself because you've learned a skill. So he said, Anne, you should really write to Mrs. Shriver, Eunice Kennedy Shriver. He had done some work with the Kennedy Foundation. And so he and I both wrote a letter. He signed it, I signed it, and we wrote to her and told her that this is what we wanted to do in Chicago. And she invited us out, and we sat with her and told her that we wanted to put on a citywide track meet, citywide Park District track meet, and have other activities. And she said she liked the idea. And she said that she had been dreaming about something like this for many years. And she told us to write up a proposal, how much it would cost. We did that, sent it to her, and she gave the Park District $25,000 to put on the first games. But she also gave herself. Now, that same summer, her brother, Robert Kennedy, was killed. And she had included for us, the executive director of the Kennedy Foundation, to help us network the country, because she had convinced us that it shouldn't be a citywide track meet. It should be one that we invited everybody from around the country, where she knew, having from the Kennedy Foundation, had kids that would come to Chicago, and local people helped pay to get them here. So we had 1,000 children from 26 states in Canada come to Chicago, and that's how it began. But that day, June 20th, 1968, Mrs. Shriver and the Kennedy Foundation had decided to incorporate the idea of Special Olympics and make it a national program. And that's how the Special Olympics National, International began, from that seed of the first proposal. So I have to say it's bifurcated. You know, we had the idea to put on a track meet, which the Greeks really started, and Mrs. Shriver made us think bigger and out of the box. She truly was a mentor to me. So when you say who started it, it's left to history, really, I guess. We both, I guess, worked on it.
Well, there's an element there that I'd like to probe a little bit, which is the leadership talent and skills that you yourself, as a young woman, were demonstrating. I mean, I'm hearing about, you know, you as a phys ed instructor dealing with the president of the park board, the vice president. You're in the room with the mayor as he puts the arm on Avery Brundage, one of the most important people in athletics in the whole world.
Well, yeah.
Taking an idea and projecting it onto Soldier Field. So, you know, raising it those notches. I heard a reference to, you know, the Olympic Village, which was the LaSalle Hotel. I heard you talk about a fleet of buses. Now, where did this come from in you? Was this the first time these skills emerged, or had you always?
Well, I went to camps my whole life. I was a park kid. I participated in outdoor sports. I was a basketball player, you know, things like that. A camp recreation leader, blew my whistle, everybody line up, you know, things like that. So I suppose the leadership skills came about for that. And working in the parks, I had to engage the local community and banks to help support those kinds of events that I put on a smaller scale. But it never occurred to me that I needed something outside of just asking people to help put on a track meet. But I didn't do it all myself. There's no question about it. Once the Park District, we engaged in this, and Mrs. Shriver gave us the money, the Park District put on the Pan Am Games many years before. The Chicago Park District has done so many events, and Mayor Daley had suggested that Tom Maher of Continental Air Transport would be very helpful, and that the Conrad Hilton people, you know, Jim Shearer would help. And so calling those people to come sit at a table to talk about what needed to be done. If kids were coming from other places, we needed a place for them to stay overnight.
Now, what did Mayor Daley? What was in it for him? What was he seeing? Why was he putting himself into this event based on what you know about him?
These were children, but I think he also realized that these children he never saw too much of either, because they were secluded, either in an institution or in homes. Parents never talked about their retarded kid, that's what they'd say, or there was one person in the neighborhood who was, you know, educably, mentally handicapped, and not like all the other kids. So he must have recognized, he remembered kids like that. But he absolutely loved children, and these are Chicagoans. As far as he's concerned, I would assume he was concerned, these were Chicagoans who didn't have opportunities like everybody else, and nothing was going to be spared for kids.
So what were What were the lessons that you think you learned from him? In a way, he was a mentor of yours as well.
Oh, absolutely. Well, just asking, if you don't ask the question, you're never going to get an answer. And if you don't ask someone to help you, no one will. And so it became very clear that, I just did what people around me did. Mrs. Shriver would make phone calls, have everybody come in. I just watched them and I observed them. So the mayor was a beautiful person to watch, and Dan Shannon and President McFetridge. I mean, these were people. President McFetridge was head of the biggest union, international union in the country, and he was president of the Park District. He had to network. And the networking skills that we call networking now, I don't know what they called it then, but they did that, and they did it naturally. So I just did what they did.
We've been highlighting some of Mayor Daley's strengths. Did you see any weaknesses on the part of Mayor Daley? Now, I could probably say there were some, but at the time, no, absolutely not. I mean, he was there. He came to Soldier Field. He helped in the publicity of it all. And I mean, I couldn't see anything that he didn't do that we asked him to do, or he suggested. His special events people were involved. So, and all of Chicago came out for it. In fact, Richard M. Daley, his son, same age as my husband, maybe just a year or so older, and ourselves, was a driver for the people who were the guests. Rayford Johnson, Rosie Greer came in, Jim Lovell, he came in. So all the VIPs that came in, we had to reach out and fan out and get our friends. Jim Houlihan, Tom Hines, Neil Hartigan, they all were drivers for the VIPs, picked them up at the airport and did things like that. Wow. I mean, that's an honor roll of the people who were calling on in this oral history project, and yes. They were all drivers.
They were all drivers, chauffeurs.
Why don't we talk about the Special Olympics, I mean, down to the present. Tell us about your continuing involvement and how it's evolved and the rest of the story.
Yeah, well, the country embraced the Special Olympians, saw what their abilities were, and subsequently Ted Kennedy made sure there was federal legislation, that there was education programs, public schools were open to kids with disabilities from the time they're in preschool all the way through to actually 21 or 22, I think. And programs flourished, and the games flourished worldwide. I think there's 186 countries. One of the most heart-wrenching experiences I ever participated in after the first games. I put on the second games in 1972, but I was able to go to some of the other games around the country, and I went to Dublin when the games first were out of the country for the first time, and there were 160 countries there. Nelson Mandela, Bono, I mean, everybody. And we brought, thanks to Chris Kennedy and Chicagoans, we brought 25 Special Olympians from the first games to Dublin with their families and caregivers for those games. One mom came up to me during Esther Cusack, and Michael's still alive. He's had a stroke and he lives in Momence, Illinois. He's almost 60, one of my former students. Came up to me and she said, "Anne, when Michael was born, I thought this was the end of the world. But because of Special Olympics, it was really the beginning. Because Michael still participates, he just loves swimming, did everything, and really lived at home until the very end of his parents being able to take care of him."